All right, Rabbi say good morning. Let us begin, or let us continue, I should say. So we picked up yesterday, if you remember again, in Os Nun Chas, in Tzidkas HaTzaddik, what I think is a really incredible and pivotal piece by the Rebbe, focusing on this idea that Reb Tzaddik introduced us to, namely the fact that I know two things. I should say, a person possesses knowledge in two different parts of his body. There are things that I know in my mind and things that I know in my heart. What the Rebbe calls intellectual knowledge versus emotional knowledge. So with that, let me give you the further backdrop. The Rebbe explained the dynamic of sin. That if we accept the premise that people at their core are good, people at their core are tov, and that by definition when I sin, it's not coming from my inner essence. If that's the truth, then how does sin occur? To which the Rebbe says, because we forget. We forget what exactly we're forgetting. We forget the Ribono Shel Olam. We forget his mitzvos. We forget the importance of making proper life decisions. We forget priorities, whatever it is, but we forget. How can you forget? So the Rebbe says again, because I know different things in different places. There are certain things I know in my mind, intellectual knowledge. There are certain things I know in my heart, emotional knowledge. The Rebbe says you could easily forget things that you know in your mind. Maisim b'chol yom. Things that I know to be intellectually true, yet I ignore them. But yet that which I know in my emotion, that which I know emotionally, that which I know in my heart, those are the things ultimately, again, that a person does not forget. So the Rebbe goes on, he says, we're picking up on page Kuf Lamed Beis, let's read in the Be'orei HaChasidus, on the left-hand column, 2, 4, 5 lines in. He says, Umemela, Hayamargish belibo ba'osa is ad kama chamor lavar al tzivuyov, efshar klal shahaya b'cholzos osa es havera. If a person were to truly remember in an emotional capacity, if I were to truly remember in my heart the Ribono Shel Olam, and the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks so little of me in comparison with what He gives me, I would never commit an Aveira. And the fact that I do commit an Aveira is indicative of the fact that obviously I have forgotten. Vasyaso es osa ha'aveira nova'as rak mikach shayetzer hara ma'alimo ma'alim es ratzon ha'pnimi umashkiach es chumras hatzivui mehargashas libo. And it must be that somehow the mechanics of the Yetzer Hara is that somehow it allows me to forget. It allows me to forget ultimately what is important, and it somehow obscures or covers up my true ratzon, my true will to be good, to do good, and somehow causes me to engage in emotional forgetfulness. V'zeh be'inyon, v'zeh ke'inyon ma sha'kadosh baruch hu omer liYisrael b'tochacha shal parshas ha'azinu vayishman yeshurun vayiv'at shamanta avisa. So the Rebbe says, what's the meaning of the word shamanta avisa? Shamanta means you got fat. Shamein. You got fat. What's avisa? So the Rebbe says something absolutely amazing. He says avisa means to cover something up. Kimo kisisa es libecha b'shuman. It means that you've grown fat, and as a result, the heart has been covered over with a layer of fat. So what does that mean? Now, I will say, we see this concept all the time. For example, tshuva is often compared to what? A bris milah, right? That ultimately, again, that the heart sometimes is covered over by an arla, is covered over by the, so to speak, the emotional foreskin. And tshuva, therefore, is, again, the removal of that layer. The Rebbe says, what's the pshat when something is covered? What's the pshat? The pshat is you don't see it. And if you don't see it, you forget it. Out of sight, out of mind. So amazingly enough, in the Tochacha itself, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I know why this is happening. Shamanta visa, you got fat. There's some extra, and that extra is covering over your heart. And because it's covering over your heart, you are forgetting in life that which is most important. Again, he quotes other psukim. So we'll say, what an incredible idea. So the Rebbe giving me the dynamic of sin. When does sin occur? When do dramatic missteps and mistakes occur? When I forget my priorities. When I forget my Ribono Shel Olam. When I forget what I'm supposed to be doing in life. That is when dramatic and traumatic mistakes occur. That was Tzidkas Kuf Lamed Gimel. This is incredible. So now that I know that Shichacha, and I will say, as I mentioned in yesterday's, the opening to this os, now you also understand why the Shulchan Aruch himself begins with the phrase, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi summit. I place Hashem before me at all times. Because as I mentioned, the Baal HaTanya explains, at the end of the day, successful spiritual living is predicated upon perpetual and consistent God awareness. God awareness, because it is so easy to forget. So easy. Shamanta avisa. So easy for the heart to get covered over and just to forget about what's important in life. What is it? No, it doesn't happen to all of us where you just forget. You forget your priorities. Sometimes it happens in a day. Sometimes for many of us, it happens over a sustained course of many years. But lamaisa, I forget my priorities. So we'll say here the Gemara does something, the HaTzaddik does something amazing. See, he says, so how do you combat forgetfulness? How do you combat it? So we'll say, take a look at page Kuf Lamed Gimel. This is such a profound piece. Now we're going to go ahead and probably do this over 2 days. But look what he writes. Yesh lochiach sherak hazechira balev monaas es ha'adam mila avor ha'avera. So therefore, again, if forgetfulness is the problem and is the reason why I commit averos, then of course the antidote to forgetfulness is remembrance, right? Is zechira. So I have to work on remembering the Ribono Shel Olam. I have to actively work on remembering that which is important. At work on remembering my priorities. He goes on, he says, Yesh lochiach sherak haschira balev monas ha'adam ilavar ala avera v'lo dai b'zechiras hadavar b'moach bilvad. Then I will say, remember again, not only do I have to remember, but what type of memory do I have to cultivate? What type? Emotional memory. Right? Remember again, because intellectual memory is not enough. I can know things intellectually, be acutely aware of things intellectually, and yet fundamentally ignore it. I will say, again, I know it's wrong to hurt other people. I know it's wrong to speak lashon hara, right? I know it's wrong. Fill in the list. It's not the pshat that I didn't know it was usher to do this. I didn't know you're not allowed to do it. I knew it, but for whatever the reason, I chose to ignore that which I intellectually knew in the pursuit of something else. So therefore, the Rebbe says, if the problem is forgetfulness, the solution is awareness, but it's not intellectual awareness. That's important. Also, we'll discuss. It's emotional awareness that's most important as the antidote to sin and to lapses in proper behavior. So the Rebbe say, look at this. Shariskulas mitzvahs tzitzis hu liskor al yada eskom mitzvos Hashem. So I'll say, for example, the Rebbe says, before we get into the mechanics, the Rebbe says, give you an example. We have a mitzvah of tzitzis. And what's the point of the mitzvah of tzitzis? Why do we have a mitzvah of tzitzis? To remember all of the other mitzvahs. Re'isim also, right? The goal of tzitzis is to see it and to remember mitzvos Hashem. Say here, the Rebbe tells an incredible story. I mean, it's not. He relates an incredible Gemara. You see footnote Kuf Chav Tes in the print that looks so small. You're not really supposed to read it, but you actually are supposed to read it. So also here he quotes this Gemara in Kuf Chav Tes Menachos. So we saw in Daf Yomi not so long ago. So look at this story. He quotes over here the Gemara pretty much verbatim. Maisa ba'adam echa. We'll start the Maisa today. Maisa ba'adam echa sheyazar b'mitzvah tzitzis. There was a story of a man who was very meticulous and very careful in the mitzvah of tzitzis. Shama sheyish zona b'krachei hayam shenoteles dalid meos zehuvim b'schara. And he heard about a particular zona, a prostitute, who charged an exorbitant amount of money, and she was overseas. So I'll say there's two things happening over here. Number one, she's very expensive. Number two, she's very far away. But this guy decided, this was a worthwhile investment. Shiger la arba meos zehuvim v'kaval azman. So we'll say, what does he do? He makes an appointment with her. And by the way, not only that, but what else does he do? He prepays. No installment plan, no whatever. He mamish prepays fully paid up front, and makes an appointment with her. I will say, just before we go on with the Maisa, I should stop here, so get everybody to come back tomorrow morning on time. I will say, so what I want to point out is something very interesting. You'll say to yourself, one second, how did this story start, Rabbi? So what was the introduction to the story? That there was a guy, right? And how we introduced to him? He's makbid on tzitzis, right? He's makbid on tzitzis. And then, by the way, what does it say right afterwards? Oh, and by the way, he was a habitual visitor to prostitutes. Right? That's how we're introduced to him, right? He's makbid on tzitzis because Rabbi said, by the way, if he's finding this woman, the fact that he's spending this amount of money, this investment of time indicates that this is not his first rodeo. In other words, that this is what this guy does. This is what he's involved in. This is the world that he lives in. So isn't it incredible? That he's introduced to us as a guy who's makbid on tzitzis, but yet again we see his involvement with the zonos. So I'll say we'll go on with the rest of the story tomorrow, but understand what's the incredible message? We all live with contradictions. We all live with contradictions. We are all inconsistent. So you say to yourself, really? You're makbid on tzitzis? Very nice, beautiful. Maybe you should be makbid on arayis also. Not a bad suggestion. Maybe don't worry as much about the tzitzis. Be a little bit more focused on morality. But let's say we all live with inconsistencies. And there are things that we are strong in, and there are things that we are very weak in. But our strengths often don't combat our weaknesses. But the good news is that our weaknesses also don't negate our strengths. And that sometimes I accept the fact that I'm an entity of inherent contradictions. But all I could focus on is the fact that I do have some good inside of myself, good things that I do, gives me the strength ultimately to overcome those weaknesses. So I'll stop here about saying, we'll pick up with this individual. By the way, we're going to see his name as well, or at least somewhat of his identity as well by the end of the story. And Amirat Hashem, we'll see how this ties back to Reb Tzaddik's understanding of the cultivation of emotional awareness and knowledge. Shkayach Abosai.